Okay, so this, I promise, will be shorter than the last couple of videos, which talk about using the database and the different sources. This is just sort of a summary video as you're working on paper number 4 with some additional suggestions on how to approach it. Make sure to email me if you have any questions. And thanks to those of you who've already sent me drafts of the paper. If I haven't already sent you back your draft with comments, I'll be doing that. I'm recording this on Friday afternoon, and so I'll be sending those back by tonight if you sent me a draft. So I appreciate you're taking the time to do that. So for this paper, a couple of things to remember. As I said in the other 2 videos, do not leave this until the day before. This is not an assignment that's easily done very quickly because, again, you not only have to find the article in the database, but as I mentioned, you've also got to figure out what quotations you're going to use from the database article. You've got to figure out how you're going to make connections between the article that you found and the poem that you're writing about. So there's just more going on in this paper. It's the same structure and the same basic format as papers 2 and 3. But there's just more happening. And again, it's an indication of the kind of work that you'll end up doing in English 102 if you're taking that maybe in the spring semester, because that's where you really are focusing a lot on research and using different kinds of sources. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're working on this one. It's just not one that lends itself very well to procrastination. So I just wanted to just remind you that again. Now, in terms of doing the research, I've had a lot of good questions from many of you on what sources to use. And, again, this is a matter of trying to narrow down the sources in the Chicago Tribune database. One article I can definitely tell you that's very strong and goes into a lot of detail about Woods and her life in Chicago, and even about how she decided to become a singer and a poet, would be the one by Josh Terry. I think I've mentioned that in one of the other videos, but that's a really comprehensive article. It's not the only one. Some of the Greg Kot ones are also interesting and have a lot of good information. But yeah, if you're finding an article that's just a review of a show that she did, or a concert that she had performed, or a reading that she had done, those are not going to be helpful. But the Josh Terry one is really good. Like I said, there's a couple of Greg Kot articles that are in the database. I think there's 3 or 4 of them actually, and a couple of those have some really good background information on her. So again, take your time looking through them. Those, again, are my suggestions for articles that I think are kind of helpful for this topic. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you're not going to find in the article, and this is something to think about when anytime you're doing research. Doing research doesn't mean you're trying to find an answer, like the right answer for something. It means you're trying to put together a lot of information on a particular topic so that you can digest it, and then give it back to the reader, and also provide some kind of analysis. So you're not going to find a statement where Jamila Woods says in any of these articles, like, I write my poems because of this influence from Chicago. It won't happen. Even her poems themselves have a lot of Chicago influences, but it's subtle. It's not a direct sort of answer. And this is, I guess, what makes, writing, for example, or doing this kind of research different than maybe a math problem, for example, where it might have a definitive answer, depending on the kind of math that you're doing. So keep that in mind. So, for example, if you look at the Josh Terry article, she talks a lot about, her grandmother's church. Now, that's where she learned how to sing. And that's also, I think, where she first got inspired even to think about becoming a writer or singer. And so that's the kind of information you want to look for. Where does she give us information about how she ended up as a writer? Because clearly she faced challenges, right? We saw that in the Daddy Dozens poem. We saw that, in Deep in the Homeroom of Doom. There's other poems that are linked, on the Poetry Foundation, where she talks about some of the challenges of growing up in her neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. By the way, I should mention, when you see the name Beverly, Beverly is a neighborhood on the south side, so it's not a separate town or a suburb. That's important to remember. If you know Chicago, all of our neighborhoods have different names. My wife and I live here in Rogers Park on the more north side of the city. Beverly is one of the south side neighborhoods, which, by the way, has one of the best record stores in the city. I haven't been there in a few years, but it's really good. So remember that when you see her mentioning things like Englewood or Beverly, those are neighborhoods. They're not separate towns. My dad, by the way, always gets confused about that. Whenever he comes to visit us, he says, "So what town are we in now?" I said, "We're in Chicago, but we're in a different neighborhood." So just keep that in mind, because everything she says in those interviews is about, that childhood where she was, especially when she got into high school, where she was going to that Catholic school, or she was one of the few African-American students. And there clearly were big class differences between her and some of the other kids, as she writes about in Deep in the Homeroom of Doom. So you have to remember that those are all these Chicago influences. They're not all positive ones. Her work with young Chicago authors, even when she was a kid, that had a positive impact on her. And being in a city like this that is so diverse and has all these opportunities really has helped her along. But it doesn't mean that every influence that she has, or really that anybody has, is necessarily a positive one. I mean, she's clearly writing autobiographically, particularly in that Homeroom of Doom poem. But these are not good memories necessarily. But are those still influences? Of course they are. I mean, we're shaped by both the good and the bad in our lives. And I think a poet like Woods, or a writer like John Porcellino, for those of you that might be doing topic 2 where you're comparing the two of them, they're writing about everything. And so everything inspires them, everything influences them, both the good and the bad, especially when you're writing that autobiographically. And especially, again, as I've said, in general, a lot of Chicago writers that grew up here, that are based here, do have a style that is very direct. It tends to be very autobiographical. There's a lot of humor in it, as you've seen. And again, I'm generalizing, but that's pretty much the style. It's not the same style as writers from New York. It's not the same style as writers from Los Angeles, or writers from New Orleans or Atlanta. Every place has a slightly different approach, because again, you're a product of the world that you grow up in. You're a product of the people that you're around and of the opportunities that you have or that you don't have. So those are things to remember. And I say that because, again, don't go into looking through these articles looking for like the answer, the right answer, because research is more about finding different ideas, different sources, and putting together some kind of story of your own, some kind of an analysis. And so, what I'm asking you to do with this paper is to look at the source so you know more about her, so you have an informed opinion. That's really critical. You'll have an informed opinion about this artist and poet, and then you'll have more of a foundation to write about her. Because if you don't know anything about her and you don't know much about her background, it's harder to write about her poetry. But I guarantee you, the more you take a look at the articles, like I said, the Josh Terry one, you're going to realize why she's writing the way that she does, and you're going to find a lot of insights, even into a short poem, short, very comical poem like Daddy Dozens. And that's what the research process is all about. And as I've probably said before, I happen to enjoy that process. I know it can be daunting and intimidating at times, but it can be a lot of fun. It's like detective work. You're finding all this information and putting it together and trying to understand what it is that you're reading, rather than just having an opinion that's not grounded in any kind of a research or facts. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're working through this. And of course, like I said, if you need any help, you need any other suggestions for a different article, or, for the structure of the paper, please let me know. Now, the last thing I'll mention with this is that we are using the same structure as paper number 2 and 3. So it's the introduction with the thesis, as I've mentioned. You're going to talk about the material that you found from your article in the first half of the paper. That's your sort of foundation for the rest of it, to show the reader that you've done this research and you know about the subject that you're writing about. And then in the second half, again, give me your opinion on the poem. I don't want anyone else's opinion on the poem that you're discussing. I want to know what you think of it, especially now that you have learned more about her and more about her roots here in Chicago. So how do you understand that poem differently now that you've actually gotten some insight into her life and even into her career now? Because not only is she a singer and a poet, but she also has, as a lot of you have seen, if you've started doing the research, she's tried to give back to the community. She still works with young Chicago authors herself. She mentors young students. A couple of years ago, she did a reading over at Fremd High School right near campus. That was in spring of 2019, about almost 2 years ago now, because she still does that outreach. She's still working with high school students. So I think her experiences in high school, this is my speculation, as she talks about in Deep in the Homeroom of Doom, have kind of inspired her to try to help other people, try to inspire other kids, who might be facing struggles as they try to decide what they want to do with their lives. So anyway, those are some suggestions, just as you keep working on this paper. A lot of these suggestions, by the way, are based on questions that I've gotten from you over the last week or so as you've started thinking about and working on this essay. So like I said, let me know if you have any other questions. Make sure to read over those directions. And if you haven't had a chance yet to watch the video on how to use the database, or the second video on some of the other articles that are really strong. I have a lot more in that second video also about John Porcellino, if you are going to do topic number 2. So take a look at that. I know I've been speaking a lot about Jamila Woods, but again, you're welcome to do the second topic. It's just that she still is the focus of the research. I've already given you an interview about Porcellino for topic number 2, if you're going to choose to do that one. All right. So as always, let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to go read a couple of drafts now before I wrap up for this week. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you next week in the next video. Bye.